First, Birth of a Nation. Then, Gone with the Wind. 2001, A Space Odyssey. Love Story. See you next Wednesday. And now...
This thing has been frozen in ice for 20 million years, so I figure it must be lonely.
Bananas!
Call out the National Guard.
Oh, this is going to be the best set.
Schlock!
Good day, Mr. Devlin.
He's here at last. Good evening. Count Dracula comes to New York in a story of blazing caskets, smoking, burning passion.
I heard a rooster crow.
It's explosive.
When you come back tonight, it's okay to use the front door.
Sensational.
Oh my, are you biting me?
Love at first bite. Rated PG.
Are you ready to press play?
There was something strangely magical about the 1970s. That smoky haze of midnight movies, the echo of drive-in speakers, and the wild belief that anything could be turned into art, or at least into a movie. It was a decade where horror didn't always want to scare you. Sometimes it just wanted to make you laugh, right before it scared the hell out of you. Long before parody became a genre of its own, Hollywood was already experimenting with madness. It was the age of Mel Brooks and Vincent Price, where gothic castles met disco lights, and monsters learned how to deliver punchlines. The 1970s gave us a strange new kind of cinema, one that danced between screams and laughter, where vampires wore tuxedos and mad scientists cracked dad jokes. These weren't the polished, jump-scare-heavy horror films of later decades. These were raw, rebellious creations, full of irony, camp, and imagination. The filmmakers weren't following rules. They were laughing at them, from organ-playing killers to glam rock phantoms, from killer vegetables to misunderstood monsters. This decade turned horror upside down and made it fun. In this countdown, we'll revisit 9 unforgettable horror comedy mashups of the 1970s, movies that dared to make fear funny and humor horrifying. Some became cult legends, others faded into obscurity, but all of them captured that chaotic, creative spirit only the 70s could offer. And trust me, number 5 on this list, it's a masterpiece of revenge and ridiculousness that still leaves audiences laughing and a little bit nervous. Stay tuned till the end, because the final pick might just be the wildest rock opera ever to come out of Hollywood, where music, murder, and madness collide in perfect harmony.
My music is for Phoenix. Only she can sing it. Anyone else that tries, dies.
Phantom of the Paradise.
In a decade that celebrated excess, no film captured the chaos of art, fame, and madness quite like Phantom of the Paradise. Released in 1974 and directed by a young Brian De Palma, it was part Phantom of the Opera, part Faust, and part rock concert from another dimension. The story follows Winslow Leach, a naive composer who sells his soul to a record producer named Swan, a Mephistopheles in bell bottoms, only to be betrayed, mutilated, and reborn as the Phantom haunting a glam rock theater called The Paradise. What unfolds is an operatic fever dream of glitter, gore, and electric guitars, where love songs turn into screams and fame becomes the true monster. Visually, it's dazzling, all sequins, neon, and eyeliner. But beneath the spectacle lies biting satire. De Palma skewered both the recording industry and the Hollywood machine, showing how art gets chewed up and sold like candy. Every frame feels like a carnival mirror reflecting the 1970s itself. Beautiful, grotesque, and impossibly loud. And yet, for all its chaos, there's genuine tragedy in Phantom of the Paradise. Winslow isn't a villain. He's an artist, destroyed by his own dream. The humor is dark, the music infectious, and the horror strangely poetic. The film bombed at first, only to be resurrected years later as a cult masterpiece, loved by the same kind of misfits who dance to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's the perfect finale to our list, because if the 70s taught us anything, it's that the line between horror and art, parody and passion, fear and fame, never really existed. In Phantom of the Paradise, it all bleeds together, in style, in sound, and in glorious tragic harmony.
First, Birth of a Nation. Then, Gone with the Wind. 2001, A Space Odyssey. Love Story. See you next Wednesday. And now...
This thing has been frozen in ice for 20 million years, so I figure it must be lonely.
Bananas!
Call out the National Guard!
This is going to be the best set.
Schlock!
Before John Landis gave us Animal House and An American Werewolf in London, he made something far stranger. Schlock. It was 1973. The world was still recovering from The Exorcist, and here came a movie about a man in a cheap ape suit terrorizing suburbia. But this wasn't your typical creature feature. This was a love letter to every bad monster movie that ever flickered through a drive-in screen. The plot? Barely there. The laughs? Constant. The creature called the Schlockthropus is part man, part ape, and completely absurd. He rampages through Southern California, eating bananas, kidnapping cheerleaders, and falling in love, all while the police chase him with the kind of deadpan seriousness that makes everything 10 times funnier. What makes Schlock special isn't its budget, which was almost non-existent, but its heart. You could tell Landis adored the old-school monster flicks of the 50s and 60s. He just decided to lovingly roast them. The film's humor came from exaggeration, timing, and an unapologetic sense of, let's just have fun with this. And hidden under that ape suit, a young Rick Baker, who would later become Hollywood's most legendary makeup artist. Watching him stomp around in fake fur, you can see the future of practical effects comedy beginning to take shape. Schlock was never meant to be serious. It was a cinematic dare to see how far you could push parody before it looped back into affection, and somehow it worked. Long before meta-horror was a thing, Landis proved that you could mock the monster and still love it.
What's it on your fur? Looks like blood.
Television in the early 1970s was a strange playground where horror met melodrama and camp slipped quietly into America's living rooms. The Cat Creature, 1973, a made-for-TV movie produced by Douglas S. Kramer and written by the legendary Robert Bloch, Psycho, is a perfect time capsule of that weird blend of fear and fun. The plot sounds straight out of a B-movie fever dream. An ancient Egyptian amulet is stolen, unleashing a curse that turns its victim into a murderous feline spirit. But instead of pure terror, what the audience got was something more charmingly offbeat, a mix of mystery, noir, and tongue-in-cheek horror that never took itself too seriously. What makes it so deliciously 70s isn't just the premise, but the vibe. The film bathes in smoky lighting, eerie synths, and melodramatic acting that teeters between spooky and soap opera. Its detectives act like they've wandered in from Columbo, and its victims scream like they know they're on TV. You can practically feel the polyester, and yet, beneath the camp, there's a strange sincerity. The filmmakers clearly loved the old Universal monster traditions. They just updated them for the age of color TV and shag carpets. The Cat Creature became a quiet cult favorite, the kind of late-night broadcast that made kids peek through blankets and adults chuckle at its over-the-top seriousness. In a decade where horror was learning to laugh at itself, The Cat Creature proved that even a TV budget couldn't stop Hollywood from having a little wicked fun. After all, in the 70s, the line between terrifying and totally ridiculous was paper thin, and that's exactly what made it purr.
Good day, Mr. Devlin.
If Dr. Phibes was a symphony of revenge, Theater of Blood was its encore. Louder, bloodier, and funnier. Released in 1973, it gave Vincent Price another chance to unleash his signature mix of menace and wit, this time as Edward Lionheart, a failed Shakespearean actor who takes vengeance on the theater critics who mocked him. But this wasn't your typical slasher. Each murder was staged as a twisted reimagining of a Shakespeare scene, from Julius Caesar's stabbing to the Merchant of Venice's pound of flesh. Price played every moment with theatrical pride, quoting lines from the Bard while exacting poetic justice. The result? A bizarre yet irresistible blend of literature, gore, and camp. It's the kind of movie that shouldn't work, but somehow it's glorious. Between the exaggerated deaths, the flamboyant costumes, and Price's absolute commitment, Theater of Blood became a delicious satire of both horror and high art. You could laugh at its absurdity, but you also couldn't deny its craftsmanship. Critics at the time were split. Some thought it was too over the top. Others secretly admired how it turned their own profession into a punchline. Decades later, though, the film found its true audience. Lovers of dark humor who saw in Lionheart not a villain but a tragic artist. Someone who just wanted applause, even if it came at the end of a spear. In the grand stage of the 70s horror comedy, Theater of Blood stands tall as the perfect performance, a standing ovation to madness, ego, and revenge.
Dr. Phibes.
Dear, how are we going to get him off this? You take his head, and I'll take his feet. Let's unscrew him.
49. Who's this? Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet a dear friend. 9 killed you.
Long before horror villains wore masks or wielded chainsaws, there was Dr. Phibes, a vengeful genius with a pipe organ, a taste for art deco, and a flair for dramatic murder. Released in 1971, the Abominable Dr. Phibes turned revenge into an art form and horror into high camp. Vincent Price, the king of Gothic charisma, played Dr. Anton Phibes, a brilliant but disfigured man, avenging his wife's death by recreating the 10 plagues of Egypt on the doctors who failed her. But instead of gore, we got elegance. Each death was staged like a twisted magic trick. Death by frogs, by bats, by mechanical contraptions so elaborate they bordered on comedy. And yet, through all its absurdity, there was something mesmerizing. The sets gleamed with gold and color. The dialogue dripped with melodrama, and Price never once broke character. He didn't need to snarl or scream. His silent, stylized presence made the absurd believable. You weren't just watching horror. You were watching performance art. Audiences at the time didn't quite know what to make of it. Was it scary, funny, beautiful? The answer was all three. Dr. Phibes became a cult phenomenon, the kind of film that midnight moviegoers would whisper about years later, its organ music echoing in their memories. In an era obsessed with realism, the Abominable Dr. Phibes dared to be artificial, gloriously so. It was a reminder that horror could be theatrical, stylish, and wickedly funny all at once. And even today, Vincent Price's Velvet Revenge still feels strangely satisfying.
Tomato.
Attack of the killer tomatoes. Lives are shattered. The nation is in chaos. Death and destruction sweeps the country. Foursquare Productions presents perhaps the funniest film ever made. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You've never seen a film like it.
Just when Hollywood thought it had run out of monsters, someone asked the most ridiculous question ever. What if tomatoes attacked? That's how Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was born. A movie so absurd that it became genius. Released in 1978, it was a low-budget spoof that somehow managed to lampoon every single B-movie cliché that came before it. The plot? Simple and insane. Ordinary tomatoes mutate into bloodthirsty killers, rolling through towns and devouring everything in sight. The government responds with a special task force made up of the most incompetent heroes imaginable, and a soundtrack so catchy it actually made puberty love a cult anthem. The film's comedy didn't come from fancy effects or jump scares, but from pure, unapologetic stupidity, the kind that could only exist in the 1970s, when independent filmmakers had more ambition than money. The tomatoes weren't scary, but that was the point. The movie mocked the entire idea of creature features, turning cinematic terror into a tomato sauce spectacle. It even predicted something modern audiences didn't realize at the time, that horror and parody could live side by side, perfectly balanced between homage and mockery. What started as a joke ended up spawning sequels, cartoons, and even a video game. In a decade filled with exorcisms and serial killers, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes reminded everyone that sometimes the best scream is laughter. It's camp cinema at its ripest, and proof that in the 70s, even vegetables had a sense of humor.
He's here at last. Good evening. Count Dracula comes to New York in a story of blazing caskets, smoking, burning passion.
I heard a rooster crow.
It's explosive.
When you come back tonight, it's okay to use the front door.
Sensational.
Oh my, are you biting me?
Love at first bite. Rated PG.
By the end of the 70s, horror had gotten darker, bloodier, and deadlier. But Love at First Bite reminded everyone that sometimes the Prince of Darkness just needs a vacation. This was the Dracula story no one saw coming. A disco-era comedy where the world's most famous vampire traded his Transylvanian castle for a one-bedroom apartment in New York City. George Hamilton's Dracula wasn't some monstrous figure of terror. He was charming, tanned, and hopelessly romantic. Instead of lurking in shadows, he cruised through Manhattan's nightclubs under neon lights, trying to seduce women and dodge modern inconveniences like mirrors and garlic pizza. The film turned horror into culture shock, asking what would happen if the undead had to survive the 1970s dating scene. And that's where the magic happened. Every gag poked fun at both vampire myths and the absurdity of modern life. The Count couldn't stand sunlight, but he could handle rejection like a pro. The line, "With you, I could really sink my teeth into life," was cheesy perfection, the kind of camp humor that defined the decade. At its core, Love at First Bite was more than parody. It was Hollywood's way of saying goodbye to the old gothic monsters and hello to the glitzy, self-aware 1980s. It proved that even Dracula could evolve, trading horror for heart, capes for collars, and cobwebs for disco balls. And in the end, maybe that's what made it unforgettable. It didn't just make vampires funny, it made them human.
My name's Brad Majors.
Just a couple of clean-cut kids.
This is my fiancée, Janet Weiss.
Touch it, touch it, touch it, touch me. I wanna be dirty.
For tonight is the night that my beautiful teacher is destined to be born.
See the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Let's do the time warp again.
If Young Frankenstein was Mel Brooks winking at horror, then the Rocky Horror Picture Show was Tim Curry kicking down the door in fishnets and singing about it. Released in 1975, it was unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Part horror, part sci-fi, part rock musical, and 100% chaos. The story begins like a classic monster movie. A storm, a creepy mansion, a young couple seeking shelter. But then out walks Dr. Frankenfurter, a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. And suddenly, all the rules of cinema and society go flying out the window. With glitter, corsets, and electric guitars, this wasn't just a film, it was a rebellion. Audiences didn't know what to make of it at first. It bombed in its initial release, but when midnight screenings began popping up in the late 70s, something incredible happened. People came back, dressed up, shouting lines, throwing toast, and dancing the time warp. The movie wasn't just watched, it was lived. That's the real horror comedy magic. When the absurd becomes sacred, when fans could laugh, scream, and sing in the same breath. The Rocky Horror Picture Show became the beating heart of midnight culture, a safe haven for weirdos, dreamers, and misfits long before the internet existed. Even today, decades later, it's not just a movie, it's a ritual. Somewhere out there, in a darkened theater, a new generation is still yelling, "Let's do the time warp again."
I think we could all use a good laugh. But don't see it alone.
You hear me? Give my creation life!
Would you like to have a roll in the hay? Roll, roll, roll in the hay.
Wow!
Young Frankenstein.
In 1974, while the rest of America was falling in love with Jaws and The Exorcist, Mel Brooks decided to do something no one else dared, turn the classic Universal monster movies into a full-blown comedy. Young Frankenstein wasn't just a parody. It was a love letter to black and white horror. Shot entirely in monochrome, with sets and lab equipment borrowed from the original 1931 Frankenstein, the film looked authentic enough to fool you. Until Gene Wilder started screaming about abnormal brains. Every scene dripped with gothic atmosphere, only to be shattered by absurd, perfectly timed humor. And that's the beauty of it. Brooks wasn't mocking horror, he was celebrating it with a wink and a twisted grin. The moment that sealed it in pop culture history, Frankenstein's monster tap dancing to Putting on the Ritz. A scene so ridiculous, it somehow became genius. The audience didn't just laugh, they fell in love with the monster again. It was as if the creature had escaped, not from the lab, but from the seriousness of horror itself. While modern horror often chases realism, Young Frankenstein reminds us that fear and laughter have always shared the same heartbeat. You could almost smell the popcorn at the drive-in, hear the laughter echoing between car windows, and feel that strange mix of chills and giggles only the 1970s could create. When you look back at the 1970s, it's easy to see why horror comedy could only have been born there. It was a decade of rebellion, of excess, of beautiful chaos. The world was changing. Politics, fashion, music, everything was louder, stranger, and more experimental. And Hollywood? It followed suit, creating monsters that made you laugh, scream, and sometimes even dance. From the stitched-up brilliance of Young Frankenstein to the glitter-soaked madness of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, these films didn't just parody horror. They reinvented it. They proved that fear and humor aren't opposites. They're twins, sharing the same nervous laugh in a dark theater. Even the smaller, weirder titles, The Cat Creature, Schlock, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, carried that unmistakable 1970s spirit, fearless creativity, self-awareness, and a wink at the audience that said, yeah, we know this is ridiculous. And that's why it's perfect. They remind us that movies were once handmade chaos, imperfect, experimental, and utterly alive. There was no CGI, no irony overload, no franchise fatigue, just people with cameras, fake blood, and wild ideas about killer fruit or disco vampires, and somehow it all worked. So, which one of these do you remember seeing or hearing about first? Did you ever catch Rocky Horror at a midnight screening? Or maybe you laughed at Dr. Phibes without realizing you were watching the birth of dark comedy itself? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your favorite weird horror gem from the 70s. And if you enjoyed this trip through cinematic madness, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because next time we're heading into the 1980s, where the monsters got meaner, the laughs got louder, and horror finally learned to party. Because if the 70s made fear funny, the 80s made it iconic.